Sanctions against Russia have begun hitting the Linux kernel, with programmers from Russia being banned in mass from contributing to the Linux kernel. Not haphazard, once in a blue moon programmers, but long-time, well-established maintainers of significant portions of the Linux kernel have been banned because they are Russians. And what makes this even crazier is this is all based on an executive order that the Biden administration put in place, which could impact all GPL'd software, all of it, which is based in the United States of America. This is a very real thing that's happening, with not just theoretical legal ramifications, but actual changes that we're seeing right now happen. I'm going to walk you through all of this so you know exactly what's happening here. On February 18th, on Friday, October 18th, Greg Crowe-Hartman, this was just about 5 days ago, Greg Crowe-Hartman, who is the maintainer of the stable branch of the Linux kernel and generally seen as the second in line to the throne of Linux, right? So he's a sort of a top dog, and he's an employee of the Linux Foundation. He merged a change in the Linux kernel maintainers file. Now, what is the maintainers file? It is essentially a simple text file that lists maintainers of specific areas, specific drivers, subsystems, etc. within the Linux kernel. So it's got their name and email address and which area they're a maintainer of. And these people are not, fly-by-night Linux kernel contributors. These are people who are trusted. These are people who are long-term developers and maintainers of specific areas. And why this maintainers file is so important, among other things, is it tells people like Linus Torvalds, the head of Linux, when he sees a change come in, if it comes in from a specific person who is a maintainer of the area that the change is going into, he knows that can have a certain level of trustability to it, right? He can rely on that person to have the best interests of that component at heart, and they are well trained, they know the ins and outs of it, and it's a little easier for him to trust that software and merge it into the mainline Linux branch. So if you're in this maintainers file, being removed from it is essentially being fully banned from contributing to the Linux kernel. That's the effect of getting removed from the maintainers file. And that's exactly what happened here. Many individuals were just removed from the maintainers file. People that were contributors and maintainers of networking drivers, drive controllers, display drivers, some ARM architecture support, the UFS file system maintainer, and many others were all just removed. And the one commonality with all of these programmers is that they're all Russian, right? As you scroll through the names, you see lots of Ivans and Sergeys and Dimitris and whatnot, with a lot of .ru email addresses. So a lot of Russians kicked out of there. Now, why exactly was that happening? So the only statement provided by the Linux Foundation or Greg Crowe-Hartman as to why this change was implemented, I'm going to read to you now. It's 2 sentences. This is the entire comment for this source code change. Quote, remove some entries due to various compliance requirements. They can come back in the future if sufficient documentation is provided. End quote. Okay, vague. Wow, vague. So various compliance requirements. What are we talking about here? Are we talking Sarbanes-Oxley? Are we talking about what are we talking about? Compliance requirements. It's very vague. Also, if people can come back if they provide sufficient documentation, what kind of documentation? What would be sufficient about it? Like, there's just no information here. So I reached out to Greg Crowe-Hartman. I reached out to him personally. I reached out to the Linux Foundation contacts, and officially the Linux Foundation did not get back to me. Greg Crowe-Hartman did not get back to me. Luckily, the Lunduke Journal has eyes and ears everywhere, and I have from 2 independent sources that this is specifically regarding President Biden's Executive Order 14071, which specifically, I'm going to bring that up for you now, for those of you watching the video version. That executive order specifically prohibits working with individuals within Russia, companies, individuals, organizations, the state of Russia itself, anything Russia related, from prohibiting working with people on information technology and services. And they call out specific IT services, but I'm gonna read the first sentence to you so you know how broad this is. This involves, quote, IT consultancy and design services, and include the development and implementation of software, as well as assistance or advice relating to the development and implementation of software, including the supply and installation of bespoke software. So this is basically, if you're involved with the development of software, this Russian harmful foreign activities sanction 14071 would apply to you. Now let's look at that real quick, because this is the important part, and this is where it starts to really have broad ramifications, not just to Linux, but all GPL'd software. So this set of sanctions, this executive order, was signed on April 6th of 2022. So that was 2.5-ish years ago, right? It did not take effect, at least not in full, immediately. It didn't fully take effect until September 12th of 2024 of this year. So just less than a month ago, or a little over a month ago, right? So 40 some odd days ago. Now, once it took effect in September of this year, organizations had 90 days of grace period. They have 90 days from September 12th of this year to be in full compliance with U.S. sanctions against Russia, specifically outlined under Executive Order 14071. That would mean that the deadline, the real hard deadline, is December 11th, something like that, something on those orders. So it's getting closer, right? Now, what really makes this impact the Linux kernel is a decision made by a federal judge back in 2017. Yeah, we have to get into the nitty-gritties of the law here. So back in 2017, there was a court case known as Artifact Software versus Hancom Incorporated. Now, this particular case dealt extensively with GPL'd software, with licensing the GPL, with GPL compliance, and many other things. This was, if those of you who followed Linux and free software news back in 2017 may recall this case at least being a blip on the news radar for a little bit. But the important thing to call out here is that this case established precedent that accepting of the GPL, an acceptance of the GPL license, which contributing to GPL software would include, and using a GPL software would include, meant that you were entering into a legally enforceable contract with the entity that owned the copyright of the software licensed under the GPL. So if you were a Russian programmer and you were contributing to a GPL piece of software that was copyright by individuals within the United States of America, you are then entering into a legally enforceable contract for the development of software in the United States of America, which means that becomes enforceable under Executive Order 14071 from President Biden against Russia. And therefore, you're going to be under sanctions, right? Now, the onus for sanctions really doesn't fall onto Russians, because Russia doesn't have this sort of sanctions right in place. We do, right? So the United States does, and several other countries do as well. So what that means is the onus to be in adherence with the sanctions falls to American companies, programmers, and individuals. So if you are part of a foundation, organization, project, etc., that makes GPL software in the United States, and you allow Russian programmers or developers or Q&A people or documentation people to interact with your project at all, you are going to be, come December 11th, I think, of this year, in full violation of the Russian Harmful Foreign Activities Sanctions, specifically Executive Order 14071, which penalties for are extraordinarily vague but extraordinarily severe, because you are then in violation of sanctions against a foreign entity imposed by your government, and your government's not going to like that. Now, where this gets really tricky is technically under the law, the simple utilization of GPL'd software enters you into that legally enforceable contract. Now, most software does not have the functionality built in to disable itself under certain geolocations. And most people do not scan for geolocations when downloading said software. So that starts to get a little bit tricky. But I think where we're going to see enforcement of this become much more prevalent, because it is much easier to do and easy to show when it's not done, is contributors. So contributors from Russia, right, existing within Russia, whether or not they are Russian citizens, would fall under this sanction. Which means, because the Software Freedom Conservancy, the Free Software Foundation, pretty much all of the really major free software organizations that help to promote and run free software, most of them are located within the United States of America, for better or worse. For example, the Software Freedom Conservancy and the Software Freedom Conservancy hosts things like Inkscape, right? So Inkscape, a vector drawing application under the GPL, that would fall under this as well. So pretty soon, in order to be under legal compliance with these sanctions against Russia, we are going to see a large number of developers banned from projects if they are Russian or potentially Russian. This is just something that's going to be happening, and I think we need to be prepared for it. Now, what exactly the fallout of this is yet to be seen, but we're talking about fairly significant amounts of programmers here. There's a lot of programmers in Russia, and a lot of programmers on fairly major GPL'd software out of Russia. Like I pointed out, we're talking about drivers across the full gamut of functionality related to the Linux kernel, drive controllers and display drivers and networking, and including CPU architecture support, file systems, and the works. And when you start to apply that to every single piece of GPL'd software that is hosted within the United States, it starts to get fairly extreme. Now, where this starts to get even trickier is when you've got a piece of software that has many contributors from multiple countries. Even if it did not start in the United States, the odds of that project having contributors from the United States who own the copyright on their particular piece of code, well, now now that project technically really should not be working with Russian developers either, at least not if they continue to have those American developers involved. It's the legalities here get extremely sticky and in many cases untested. So we're coming up against an issue here that is going to have more far-reaching consequences than I think many people believe. We'll see those really come into effect over the next little less than 2 months. And what's crazy here is these aren't hypotheticals. We are already seeing the largest GPL project out there taking firm actions regarding these sanctions for 14071. The Linux kernel has already banned Russian programmers. When will those programmers be allowed back in? We don't know. That's entirely up to the United States government. What impact will this have on quality of software going forward? I don't know. We have a whole lot of now pieces of software with no more maintainer, software that people use with no more maintainer, or people who have to work on it that don't have any experience with it. What impact is that going to have? We don't know yet. Are those people who are no longer allowed to work on these GPL'd software, are they going to begin their own software projects over in Russia? I don't know, maybe. Well, what exactly is going to happen here is kind of up in the air, but it's fairly extreme nonetheless. So we'll be keeping an eye on this as we go. I'll let people know as more Russian programmers are likely going to be banned from fairly significant GPL projects, and what is going to happen to the GPL projects that refuse or simply don't take this action. I don't know that either. I don't know. But it's gonna be a weird one. It's election season right now in the United States, and after election season is over, come next month, we're going to have a president who is going to be leaving office in January, and who knows if that president is going to seek a heavy-handed enforcement of these sanctions, or lighten up the sanctions, or just not care about the sanctions. We don't know. We don't know. It's a lot of up in the air stuff, and it's kind of terrifying. Whew. Thank you to the Lunduke Journal supporters who makes all of this possible, who makes it possible for me to do these shows without worry about what the government says, or what the companies say, or what advertisers say, and without including any advertisements. Couldn't do it without you. Go to lunduke.com, lunduke.locals.com if you want to support and help make all of this possible going forward. You are all amazing. I love you, nerds. You're the best. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the whole gosh darn inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.